Got a reading today from one of the wisdom books of the Hebrew Bible, uh, the book of Ecclesiastes. Listen if you would. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. There's a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what's planted, a time to kill, and also a time to heal, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to throw away stones, and also a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, a time to lose. There's a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear, a time to sow, a time to keep silence, also a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, and also a time for peace. End of the reading. In 1982, I got a phone call from our interim pastor at our Presbyterian church in Troy. And he came on board for a couple of years because our former pastor had moved on. And so he was going to work for a couple of years while our congregation formed a search committee and looked for a new head pastor. And so Reverend Dr. Larry Austin gave me a call one evening. And he said, Gary, he said, I'm calling all the people who have been or are currently leaders in the church. He said, I want to get a feel for who everybody is, what's been happening in the church. And he said, I want to get a feel for who I can work with and who I can't work with as we go on from here. And which is the truth of the matter because, well, people are people who they are. So he said, I want to talk to you for 30 or 60 minutes some night. I invited him over, and he came over, and 4 hours later, he finally left. I had been an elder of the church on the session, which is the governing body, and I had been clerk of session, which is the head of the whole governing body for a period of time. And after he left, I looked at my wife's face, and she knew that trouble was brewing. That things were not going to go well with this new guy serving as interim pastor, and he and I getting along together so well because he right away figured out how interested I was in ministry. And in fact, it was a bone of contention in our household, in our marriage. You know, you think of two dogs who are fighting over a bone, be it a real bone or be it a rubber bone, and they're pulling at each other. Well, that was my wife and I. We're pulling at this idea because I wanted to move on from veterinary medicine into ministry. And it's like, dang it, we're going to do this. And she's like, there's no way in hell we're going to do this. Because she wanted to stay in Detroit. Her family was in Detroit. There was no moving anywhere else. And I didn't care if I moved somewhere else. That didn't bother me at all. I'd been to Princeton looking at their seminary. I'd been to Dubuque. I'd been to Louisville. I'd been to Columbus, Ohio, looking at all the seminaries, visiting them. And it's like, this is really what I want. If I want to feel alive, this is what we've got to do. And Larry, over time, discerned that there were issues in our marriage. He probably discerned them even deeper than she and I did. And he said to me one day in church, he said, hey, listen, he said, you know, if you ever want to crash at my house for a few days, you're more than welcome to. And I'm like, what's he talking about? You know, like we're not in that much trouble, you know. And but I tucked it in the back of my head. And a while later, I ended up crashing at his house for more than 11 months and sharing a house with him. The bones snapped and neither my wife nor I could handle this anymore. And I left the house. And I was in the process of leaving the marriage over the next 3 years. And um, Larry said to me he was a divorced man and had counseled, all kinds of people, hundreds of people over the years on their various life issues, including marriages. And he said, Gare, he said, it's going to take at least 5 years for you to work through all of the trauma of, separating and divorcing. I said, 5 years, right. I'm an educated man, I can work through this a whole lot faster. And I gotten a girlfriend, and he said, trust me, he said, there's tons of emotions that you're going to have to sort out. And he said, it's going to take you 5 years before you're going to be able to do that. For you to successfully move on to another romantic relationship, even though he knew I was already in a romantic relationship. And the woman with whom I was in a romantic relationship with, as I'd gotten involved then in seminary and been accepted as a Christian seminary student, she was Jewish. She was Jewish, but her spiritual practices were those of Native Americans and a Buddhist. And so we would, go out to Ann Arbor Zen Buddhist temple out there periodically, and we'd go to church periodically, and and Larry kept telling me, just be careful, Gare. Just be careful, because you got a lot of stuff to sort out, and it's going to be hard for you to work on this relationship while this relationship over here is in the process of disintegration. And so Michelle, my girlfriend, gave me a name, and it was a pejorative name, but it was her pet name for me. It was Stone Buddha. She said, Gary, she said, you're a Buddha, you resonate with Buddhism even though you're in Christian seminary, but you're a Stone Buddha. You don't have any emotion for me. You don't have any feeling for me. She said, you just sit there and do nothing. You're not moving ahead with our lives together. You're not moving ahead with your separation and divorce from your wife. And you're a Stone Buddha. So I was tagged with that name, Stone Buddha. And, the wisdom literature that I just read from, Ecclesiastes, also Proverbs, also the book of Job, they're considered wisdom literature. They're humanity's attempt to try and figure out what it is to be virtuous in the face of God. And what is it to be human at that human and divine intersection, and how does that play out in our everyday lives? And that's the wisdom literature. Well, Buddhism has its own wisdom literature, although the reason for it being is different. In the Theravada tradition, to develop wisdom, to develop panya, in Sanskrit it's called prajna, but in Theravada tradition, Pali, it's panya. To develop wisdom is to come to an understanding, not just an intellectual understanding, but an experiential understanding of the 3 marks of existence. What are they? Impermanence, suffering, non-self. To really understand those, not just in your mind, but in your heart. And in the Theravada tradition, to really truly understand the essence of the 4 Noble Truths, to understand suffering. Now, I got to tell you, going through what I was going through for a few years, I understood suffering. I understood where my friend Larry was coming from and telling me that it would take 5 years before you can really be ready for another relationship and try and be healthy in that relationship. And but in our Mahayana tradition, to develop wisdom is to come to understand the nature of reality, to come to understand emptiness, shunyata, to understand the interdependence of everything that is, that nothing exists in and of itself. We are fully interdependent upon everything that is. And of course, probably the 2 primary texts that would direct us towards that understanding and studying them are the Heart Sutra very, very, very concise statements that we chanted this morning, and the Diamond Sutra. The Diamond Sutra, the heart of wisdom. So, it was, today's the 4th and 14th, 10 days from now, I will celebrate 2 years that I was given Dharma transmission from my Dharma teacher, Most Venerable Dr. Jungmei Park. And he gave Venerable Anand of Virginia and Venerable Hae Kwan of Toronto and myself Dharma transmission on January 14th of 2022, which is a sort of an authentication that you've developed just a little bit of panya or prajna, just a little bit of insight and wisdom to be representative of being a recognized teacher within Buddha Dharma. And what is the name that he knew to give me, but he didn't know because I never told him any of that other stuff that ever went on? Stone Buddha. Sakbull. Hae Doh, you're now Sakbull. And I'm like, you gotta be shitting me. Sakbull, Stone Buddha. And I finally, figured it out. Because the name that you're given, it's yours to figure out. Why was I given that name? And of course, I knew why Michelle had given me that name, because I was emotionally unavailable. I sat there like a bump on a log and didn't do anything, at least in her eyes. And he gave it to me as far as I can ascertain and discern. Because, what does a stone Buddha do? It sits there, the rain falls on it, the snow falls on it, the mud splashes up in its face, bird shit falls on it, and nothing matters. It's fully present all the time. It doesn't let itself get caught up in the drama. So I proudly now wear the name of Sakbull. So,